Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you so much for tuning in. 1 John 5, 1 through 5 says, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves the child born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and follow his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. For whoever has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is the one who overcomes the world? But the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. 1 John 5, 1 through 5. I read those because we're going to need those today after all the things we cover and talk about with Mr. John Haller. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning.
Let's bring in John, lawyer, elder, teacher, known for his weekly prophecy updates. You can get more on him at the FBC YouTube channel. It's the Fellowship Bible Chapel in Ohio. Welcome, John.
Hi, good to be with you again, David and Mary.
All right, before we get into the plethora of topics we want to cover today, I'm just going to mention some headlines. Disney, I just take joy in this. Disney hemorrhages $900 million in box office failures, according to recent analysis. And also, one thing we'll get to, the Satanic Temple, real place, real people, demonic people. They're going to host what's called the Let Us Burn tour to mock Christians, to mock God, and to kind of counteract Sean Foyt's Let Us Worship tour. We'll talk about that. Former FBI agent sentenced to 46 months in prison for illegally holding classified documents. But what about Hillary? What about Joe Biden? And the Supreme Court denies Christian colleges appeal over transgender policy. I think we mentioned that the other day. But John, let's start with, we are right around the time here, a one-year anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And one article here at the WashingtonStand.com says 200,000 babies have been saved in a year since the Dobbs decision. Now, I've heard different numbers. I've heard different analysis of those numbers. But I want to talk about this issue because politics have changed. We noticed in the midterm elections last November, a lot of Republicans shied away from the issue and got hammered. The Democrats were full on, proud of their willingness to murder preborn babies in mothers' wombs, and they made it a campaign issue, and they did very well. So, John, before we get into some of the great points in this article by Laura Cusisto, I want to get your thoughts on where we're at and your observations.
Well, the hope was that that a decision would come down at some point overturning Roe versus Wade and Casey. And, Roe versus Wade in January, it was the 50th anniversary of that decision. It's hard to believe that it's been that long.
Yeah.
And so since then, abortion, there have been many attempts to kind of chip away at abortion. Outright bans are immediately struck down, even in states that you would tend to call as pro-life. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And I think the hope was among conservative, evangelical, pro-life people that once Roe versus Wade was overturned, that everything would be just great. And that's not what's turned out to be. Now, I've contended for a long time that once Roe is overturned, the best thing that the pro-life groups can and hope for is that it's returned to the states. Mm-hmm. So it has been returned to the states, but there has been a very mixed bag. Mm-hmm. We have to admit that. And we have to understand, too, that for 50 years, people have been educated that this is a woman's right to abortion. Now, the question is, how far do they go? And that's where the difficulty comes in. But it's hard to overcome that 50 years of education of everybody, of it being beat into them that this is a right, this is normal and that type of thing. So now we've gone to the states. So, for example, in Kansas, there was attempt to put in some, and I don't even remember now because every state's sort of doing their own thing. Ohio enacted some restrictions. Kansas, though, went, which you would think is a conservative state, but it has some very liberal enclaves like the university areas of of where the University of Kansas and Kansas State are. And remember that Kathleen Sebelius, who was the Health and Human Services Secretary under one of the first of the 3 Obama administrations that we now have had, the she was the governor of Kansas. So she's very liberal. So Kansas failed. Other states have done well, but they've enacted things, and then the courts have come in and said, well, our state constitution gives a woman the right to privacy in abortion. So it's been a very mixed bag. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the senator that was referenced in this one article is correct, that you might be able to say that, I think this is Senator Langford from Oklahoma, that about 200,000 lives may have been saved since the Dobbs decision came down a year ago this past week. But it's been a very mixed bag, and the hard work is just beginning. And so the question then is how far do you go? I mean, I personally think that this is murder. I think a lot of us that are listening to this program would agree with that. But then the question is, what's the way to get what we think enacted into law? We have a massive amount of education to do of people, though, because we're fighting against 50 years of a narrative being shoved down people's throats.
Exactly. Ray Comfort has a great new video or DVD out called What Is It? And so if you go back and define exactly what it is in a pregnant woman, a mother's womb, and understand that, okay, from let's just set aside the Bible for a moment, from science and biology, that it is a preborn human life. We might call a baby or a fetus, but a fetus simply means offspring or little one in Latin. So we have to go back and define that. But you're right, John, a lot of misinformation and miseducation for the last 50 years.
Yeah, and there were some complications. Back in the 19th century, there were laws already on the books stating that abortion was, remember that in Wisconsin, David?
Correct.
They were saying, well, Roe canceled that out. Well, no, the courts are not even sure. I haven't had an update on Wisconsin, but, you're looking at laws that have been on the books for 150 years, and so that complicates the process, as does the ordering of abortion pills online. That complicates it, too.
Oh, my goodness, yes. That's where a lot of women...
It's massively confusing, too, and then you have states like California and some other liberal states that are turning themselves into abortion sanctuary states, so that even a young girl who they will claim, I think this was an incident that happened from Ohio, a young lady taken to Indiana or someplace else to get an abortion.
Illinois?
Yeah, or Illinois, I guess it was. And it gets very confusing as to what people can do. But yeah, you're exactly right, Mary and David, both, that you layer on top of this the availability of this abortion drug, the morning after pill or whatever they call it. It's a very complicated issue. The battle's not over, and it's no time to give up. But it's not. I don't think it's been as easy as a lot of conservative and pro-life people thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
My thinking always was, once it's returned to the states, that's where the real battle is.
Yes.
And as you can see, we're fairly pretty easy to say that we are a very, very divided country.
Yes.
And, you have a lot of people even in the church that waver on the issue, so-called people who believe they're part of the church who waver on this issue and that type of thing.
Unbelievable, really.
And lives are at stake. It's pretty shocking. And then, it used to be, I would highly recommend if people just want to get educated on this and see how people on the left respond to questions. Just go to YouTube and Google Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana asking people from what I call the Biden administration and others who come in to justify, the transgender agenda, the pro-abortion agenda, that type of thing, and asking them questions, and they won't answer the question because they know that the answer would be true. But for example, now, if Kennedy asked one of these people from the government, is this a boy or a girl in the womb, they would say, well, we don't know yet. We don't know whether it's a boy or girl or some other sort of gender.
Yeah.
It's, you look at this and you just wonder how long the Lord will allow this to happen. I mean, it's been 50 years. and the Lord is patient, but at some time, massive judgment is going to come down on America. I think we have a picture of that. I'm going to swerve off topic just a little bit, but I sent you some things about commercial real estate and what's going on. And the Wall Street Journal had a thing that Wall Street's really giving up on downtown properties. And in many cities, these large commercial office buildings are completely empty because of what happened after the pandemic restrictions. People haven't returned, and in many respects, a lot of them, and this is talking about places in the Midwest, that they don't think a lot of these downtowns will come back for, if they ever do, for at least 25 years. But one of the most heavily damaged commercial real estate cities has been San Francisco. In San Francisco, two of the major hotels owned by one group, the largest hotel in San Francisco, about 2,000 rooms, the Hilton and then a Park 55, have closed. That represents over 3,000 hotel rooms.
Wow.
They haven't closed. The owner of the properties has a loan on the buildings, and they've just said, okay, lender, you do what you want. We're giving you the keys. Westfield Properties, which owns a lot of large upscale shopping malls across the country, there's a rather large shopping mall, or was still sort of a large shopping mall in downtown San Francisco. I think it's around Market Street, and called San Francisco Center. And they just said, we're giving the keys back to the lender, and the lender can decide what to do. Nordstrom is closing, another major stores, a bunch of other stores have closed. So the mall right now is about 50% unoccupied. Now, I would say that when I look at the destruction of commercial real estate in San Francisco, I think I can be fairly confident in saying that this is part of the judgment of God. That, one of our wealthiest, most beautiful cities is being destroyed. And I think it's happening because of God's judgment for what goes on there and what's been allowed to go on there for many, many years.
Yeah, sin and crime destroys cities more than anything. And then the homeless situation. People are fearful. They don't want to navigate. No store is worth it to people who want to just be left alone, so to speak. And then now they're concerned about the crime and other things they don't want to see.
Yeah, in many places that they have defunded the police departments there,
And then
which
there's
is
that, right.
idiocy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I went to a seminar in San Francisco 4 years ago in March or April, and I knew then that would be probably the last time I would ever be in that city in my life. And we used to go to San Francisco a fair amount, so it's a beautiful place. Great restaurants, beautiful scenery, things to do. But what I saw on the street, from the subway exit up the escalator to the street, I probably saw 20, 25 homeless people sleep in the subway, the subway entrance. And then it was more of the same when you got above ground. So it's shocking when you see it. And but the commercial real estate thing, this is going to happen all across the country. They've not priced this demand destruction into the market. I mean, just drive around where you live. I don't know what it's like. Well, I do know a little bit of what it's like where you live, because I was there just recently. But you drive around in the middle of the day, like here in Columbus, Ohio, you drive by these massive office buildings and in the suburbs and everywhere, and the parking lots are largely empty. Well, somebody has a loan on those properties, and a bank has that loan in its portfolio. And they've been able to kick the can down the road. But at some point, that stops. And when that stops, that just percolates through the market. And it's going to be a huge, huge problem.
Speaking of
so the economy's teetering on the brink, too.
Yeah, speaking of Columbus, Ohio, we're going to get to this. The Pride Parade there attracted 700,000 people. John, come on. You live there.
I do. A couple of years ago, they touted that they were one of the largest, maybe first or second in the country for the Pride Parade. And the attendance a couple of years ago was 500,000. Wow. This year, the Stonewall group that runs that down in what's called the Short North, it's a heavily populated by alternative lifestyles, let's just say, just north of downtown Columbus. They said 700,000. And the pictures of some of these pride parades I would just encourage people to be very careful, what you see, because they're posted a lot on Twitter, and they're pornographic. And people are standing there with their children.
Yep.
They're 3, 4, 5-year-old children. And then if somebody like me comes along and says that's GROOMING, you'll get knocked off of social media for making what they claim is a false accusation, but it's done to desensitize them, the children, to these lifestyles.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Well, we were talking before the podcast, The Marketing of Evil. David Kupelian came out with a very important book maybe 5-10 years ago. Phenomenal book, and that's what they have. They have the edge on marketing, promoting the perverse, and they have indoctrinated an entire culture.
Up here in the upper Midwest, there was a Pride Day on Saturday from 1 to 8 here in town, and then in Oshkosh, again, 1 to 8 on Sunday. And I did
only 7 hours each day?
Only 7 hours each day, and they took it on the road. And I actually went downtown in the afternoon. We drove around to see if people were going to turn out, because there's a huge farm market in the morning for families, and then this was marketed as family friendly. So we drove around a little bit, and there was no traffic. There were buses. Obviously, it's a template.
It's a road show.
It's a road show. They're probably paid by who knows who to bring this in town. It was a drag show. It was music and face painting and unicorns, blah blah blah. But we looked, and there were probably not even 100 people at this thing. So at least up here in Happy Valley, when they're busing people in, drag queens, the families are not turning out. But to say it's family friendly, and then the other thing is, what happened to obscenity laws in cities? Whatever happened to arresting people who break these? How many years ago you couldn't say A, B, C, and D in a movie, and now public nudity? Yeah. What happened to the laws over this?
It's artistic expression.
Oh, is that
you can't censor that, right, John?
Oh boy.
Yeah. So at the end of the update that I posted on Sunday, by the way, I only scratched the surface of what I had prepared, since I hadn't done one for a couple of weeks since I was in Scotland speaking at a conference.
Oh, we got to get to that too.
Right.
But the
Nanny State.
At the end of the last video I think I played in my update, so Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube or Real FBC on Rumble, this is from the New York Pride Parade. You can find it all over Twitter.
Yep.
They're marching and they're chanting, a large group of people.
That's right. I'm looking at it right now.
We're queer. We're coming for your children.
That's right.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
And
we've known
this. If I said this, I would be accused of spreading disinformation on social media. But the video is there. And just be careful. I did notice it when I pulled the video off Twitter, that there's a lady who's sort of in a little bit of state of undress.
Yeah.
But,
you put that kindly.
And I didn't really know. It's just a little short clip in there, and I apologize for that. But it's not. But this is nothing compared to the other videos that you can find about what they're doing on the street. As people, you can see the people standing there with their kids,
children,
and you see them posting on Twitter and everything. Oh, look, we went to the Pride Parade, and I took my little child there to learn about diversity and other people. And I don't think they understand the destruction that they're bringing into their own lives.
No, they are going to push this, and they're not even shy about it anymore, because, as you said, I'm following Jim Caviezel on Twitter, and he said, he shared a quote: "When did you start to believe your conspiracy theory was correct?" Answer: well, they just started saying it out loud in front of the cameras. So now they're not even keeping this a secret. They're bold. They're coming after your children. And we've been, some of us have been considered right-wingers, fanatics, conspiracy theorists, talking about the public schools. And, when did we stop being concerned about protecting children in America, John Haller? I don't think we ever stopped being concerned, but we certainly have not been speaking out against these demonic agendas.
Well, this started 1800s, early 1900s, as different people like the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State, his brother. They were very influential on the education system, who decided that they were going to change culture. And so there has been this long march through the institutions.
Antonio Gramsci.
So, right. Yeah. So right now, as we sort of trying to figure out what do we do about this, understand that we're fighting against 100 years of indoctrination, or over 100 years, and it's happened on every level. So now you see it. It's sort of like the game that you play when you go to an amusement park, whack-a-mole. It keeps popping up everywhere, and you hit one, and another one pops up, and it's very difficult to deal with. At some point, though, I think we're at the stage where, God just says, just as he did in the Old Testament with Israel, and he's done this throughout history with nations. At some point, God just says that it's up. It's over. I'm done with you. You're going to be judged. And sometimes he'll use an even worse culture or government to judge you. Then eventually he'll get around to judging them. But this is what happened with Israel. The Babylonians came in and judged them. And eventually God came back, or the Assyrians and others, and said, I'm going to get you for what you did to my people. But you had, what you did to my people was with my approval, I guess is the best way of saying that. And I really think we're at that stage there. So this thing, as I was sort of thinking about this today, David, what's going on right now in the world is a revolution. I don't remember who I read this morning. Somebody said this is a coup d'etat. And a lot of times the people who are saying this are not what I would consider to be conservative evangelical Christians. These are conservatives, but sometimes they may approve of gay marriage and that type of thing. And even they're recognizing that something is seriously wrong. And this is happening on so many different levels. I mean, it would be, if we really sat here and tried to analyze it, we would sit here for a week talking about it, because there's that many things going on. It's really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, one more thing before we kind of switch gears again. We're talking about how open the left is, and our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, forces of darkness. But these forces use human beings to advance their agendas. So what we're seeing is an openness and almost a blatantly prideful, if I can use that language, mocking of God, as we are warned. It's very prophetic. Peter wrote about it. And there's a Satanic Temple now. Well, actually, it's a movement. It's an organization. They're hosting a Let Us Burn tour. So they're going to hold these events, Let Us Burn, in other words, like burn in hell, Let Us Burn events at state capitals in order to mock God and believers. And Sean Foyt was doing this Let Us Worship tour for the past several years, getting Christians, conservatives, they're sharing the gospel. Some people have been saved. Some people have been turned away from their addictions, and some good things happening, and they're trying to influence politics. But now we've got these Satanists saying, okay, we can top that. We're going to have a Let It Burn tour. So Sean Foyt says imitation is the highest form of flattery. So they're doing this, and I just want to share this article from Harbinger's Daily on what the Satanic Temple is doing. But the point, John, is they are trying to continue to counteract what God is doing through his people in America. There's never a place where there's no battle, right? There's always warfare.
Yeah, it's coming on many levels. I read the article you wrote there at your website about the Satanic Temple. It's something that's not really even hid now. I mean, So for example, I saw a guy at a pride parade, and this stuff just pops up on my Twitter feed from people I don't even know. But he had a picture on, it said, not yet Jesus, or Jesus not yet. And it had the Baphomet goat's head symbol, like similar to the statue that's in your article on the Satanic Temple. And it's so blatant, and it's not even head. The undersecretary, I think it is, of the Health and Human Services, the fake admiral, Richard Levine, or Rachel Levine, that he calls himself now.
Yeah.
He never changed his chromosomes, by the way. He's still biologically a male. Yes. He said that it's not just a Pride Month. It's now the summer of Pride. And this is happening all over the world.
Well, it's queer all year. It's a year-round promotion, and what did you call it?
It's a telethon.
It's a year-round telethon of the
Yeah.
marketing of evil,
Yeah.
and pride is the driver of all this, right?
Yeah, and the whole thing with the transgender push and everything, it's really to have people question the basics of life, and it confuses everybody, and you can see people sort of in a state of confusion. I even see it with even somewhat in our local schools here. There's teachers who tell me that this is being pushed by teachers, and
Yes.
this is suburban, middle America, conservative. I mean, my county may have supported Trump in the last election, 75-25. I'm not sure, but that's just a wild guess. Jim Jordan is my congressman.
Oh, you're fortunate.
But even in the schools around here, it's a problem. And if you complain about it, you become on a terror watch list. You're a white supremacist and that type of thing. So they've really weaponized the justice system against people that people that disagree with them politically. That's probably we've had a revolution in this country. There's just no other way to describe it. I mean, there's still good judges, there's still good prosecutors and that type of thing, but by and large, the federal government and a lot of state governments have been completely compromised and weaponized against the opposition. I just saw that California, I think, has just enacted a statute, or it's going through the approval process in the legislature to make California a sanctuary state for children who want to be sexually mutilated and fake change from one sex to another. It's fake. It doesn't work. And there's stories that come out, and you'll see them for a while and then they're gone because social media companies take them down, about people who transitioned who want to change back.
Yep.
Because it's been a problem. And this was, there's a very famous guy named Paul McHugh, who was the chief psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University, where the first sex reassignment surgery was done. And that came from a psychiatrist at that institution. And I would say I would put him sort of in the category of Kinsey, who operated out of Indiana University and who was a sexual pervert, who brought this into mainstream culture, faked research and that type of thing. But McHugh said in a Wall Street Journal article almost 9 or 10 years ago that what they found was that, the claim is if we don't let them have these surgeries, they'll commit suicide. But what they found was that the people who had actually had the surgeries were 19 times more likely to commit suicide than those who had not.
More depressed and confused.
Just worked with them well into the 90% would not go through the change.
Wow. You were talking about things being all over the world, and I can't help but think of Romans 1. It says, God gave them over to a depraved mind, a mind that doesn't work anymore. And we can see that because when I first read those verses in the 80s, I'm thinking a minority of people with depraved minds. I think we're looking at a lot of people with depraved minds. I look at that verse completely differently as the years go by, and God, we are seeing God's hand, even though judgment hasn't dropped yet. We're still seeing God's hand because He's giving them over.
Yeah.
Well, I think the giving over to the depraved mind is itself a judgment of God.
Yes.
And people really, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I watched Senator Kennedy and questioning these people, like how many genders are there? How many sexes are there?
All right, John, we've got to take a break. More with John Haller when we come back on Stand Up for the Truth.